lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother. It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others.
Behind palace walls, a moment arrived that no one expected and no one could soften. Prince William delivered a verdict so blunt it echoed far beyond royal protocol, landing like a thunderclap. Sources say Meghan was unprepared for the wording, the timing, and the finality. Phones rang. Doors closed. Emotions broke through carefully managed silence. So, what pushed the future king to speak so brutally, and why now? Today, we unravel the decision, the fallout, and the consequences that left Meghan in tears before the world. Prince William, final verdict. At exactly 7:48 a.m. on December 2nd, Kensington Palace released Prince William's statement. The world seemed to pause. From the bustling streets of London to the sunlit suburbs of California, from crowded newsrooms to individual living rooms, people stopped to absorb the moment. For decades, the monarchy had relied on careful diplomacy, measured words, and carefully managed appearances. But this statement was different. It was not vague, it was not negotiable, and it left no room for interpretation. The door to uncertainty had been closed forever. A new reality was in place, one that would affect everyone connected to the royal family and, in many ways, the very future of the monarchy itself. William's leadership was evident in every word and in every calculated pause of the announcement. It was a rare combination of strategic thinking, legal clarity, and personal resolve. Every decision leading up to this moment had been weighed against the weight of history, the expectations of the public, and the responsibilities of leadership. In a world where delays could cause confusion and silence could be seen as weakness, William acted with a precision that left no doubts. While the decision carried unavoidable emotional pain, it also created boundaries necessary to protect the monarchy and the people who relied on its stability. The statement itself was more than a message, it was a demonstration of character. William's words reflected someone who understood that leadership sometimes means taking the hardest path. There was no attempt to soften the blow with vague promises or conditional phrasing. There were no phrases like, "for now," or "at this time." Instead, there was clarity, permanence, and a recognition that some decisions must be made not for personal comfort but for the long-term survival and stability. In that sense, history had been shaped by a single, unwavering act. The reaction was immediate and widespread. News channels paused regular programming to air the statement in full, analyzing every line with a seriousness reserved for moments of true historical significance. Social media erupted with reactions that ranged from shock to admiration. Experts called it unprecedented. For decades, no royal statement had so clearly defined the future of the monarchy and set the boundaries for its operations. In homes across the world, people watched, read, and reflected on the magnitude of the moment. The weight of what had been declared sank in quickly. The monarchy had been guided into a new era, and there was no turning back. For William, the path to this moment had not been easy. Behind the scenes were long nights of reflection, careful legal review, and consultations with advisors who understood the delicate balance between family, public duty, and national interest. He had watched as emotional entanglements and media campaigns threatened to undermine years of careful work. Silence, once a tool of diplomacy, had become a liability. Every delay, every unspoken word, risked weakening the institution he was charged to protect. Though the decision caused pain, it also created protection. By drawing clear lines and establishing permanent boundaries, William ensured that the monarchy could endure challenges without being paralyzed by uncertainty. Was this just a verdict or something more extraordinary? Let's take a closer look. William's moment of unprecedented declaration. The world stopped. For a few rare, unforgettable minutes, everything seemed to freeze as people everywhere turned their attention to a single decisive moment. Television screens flickered in living rooms, offices, and newsrooms, from London to Los Angeles, as the familiar hum of daily life was replaced by an extraordinary silence. Broadcasters paused their usual programs. Sports, talk shows, and regular news updates were set aside. For the first time in decades, what was happening was not just news. It was history unfolding before the eyes of millions. At the center of this moment was William. Not in the formal, distant sense the world had grown used to over the years, but in a direct, personal way that left no room for doubt. His message was clear, firm, and unlike anything the public had heard from a royal figure in generations. There was no hedging, no vague phrases about the current situation, no polite delays or indirect diplomacy. Every word carried weight, every sentence had meaning, and every pause seemed intentional. Experts who had spent decades studying the monarchy described it as unprecedented. The significance of this clarity cannot be overstated. For decades, the monarchy had spoken in measured tones. Statements were cautious, diplomatic, and often vague. People around the world had grown accustomed to hearing phrases like, "at this time," or "under the present circumstances," words designed to leave room for negotiation, reinterpretation, or gradual change. But in this moment, those familiar words were gone. Permanence replaced ambiguity. The message was not temporary or situational. It was absolute. William was not merely speaking to the public. He was defining the monarchy's future. From the bustling streets of London to the sprawling cities of the United States, reactions were immediate. Social media exploded with fragments of his message, each clip shared thousands of times within minutes. Analysts scrambled to interpret the implications. Commentators, accustomed to cautious speculation, found themselves having to confront something far more direct. This was not a suggestion. It was not a preview of potential shifts in the royal household. It was a declaration, a statement that the rules of the institution, as everyone had understood them, had changed. What made this moment even more striking was its tone. There was no anger, no theatrics, no attempt to dominate or shock. Instead, there was calm authority. William spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent years considering the weight of his words and the consequences of his actions. Every pause, every glance, every inflection of his voice seemed calculated to convey clarity and resolve. Observers around the world sensed something they rarely experienced: a royal voice that was both human and absolute, personal yet institutionally transformative. In the United States, where royal affairs are always filtered through a unique cultural lens, the reaction was equally intense. For a country with a history of fascination with monarchy, each phrase was dissected for hidden meanings. Experts noted that this statement was more than news. It was a redefinition of the monarchy itself. Whereas previously the institution had relied on tradition, ceremony, and careful diplomacy, this message suggested a new form of leadership: direct, decisive, and unshakably clear. It was no longer a dialogue between the crown and the public. It was a declaration of purpose, signaling that the monarchy was no longer waiting for consensus or permission. Its future had been firmly established. Even longtime observers of the royal family admitted to being surprised. The absence of hesitation, the lack of conditional language, and the sheer decisiveness of William's words were all remarkable. It was as if the monarchy had been silent for decades, quietly waiting, and then suddenly found its voice. And that voice was strong, precise, and undeniable. This was not a moment that could be ignored, misinterpreted, or delayed. It demanded attention. It demanded recognition. It demanded acknowledgement that the monarchy, in its modern form, had stepped into a new reality. For ordinary people, The moment carried a strange mix of awe and anticipation. Millions watched, captivated by the rare opportunity to witness history in real time. Conversations paused in homes, workplaces, and public spaces. Even those who had never followed royal affairs closely found themselves caught in the gravity of the situation. There was a sense that something irreversible had occurred, that the world had collectively turned a page in a story centuries in the making. What drove a meticulous planner like William to act so decisively? Let's find out. The spark behind decisiveness. In the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts that occurred during autumn 2024, the world began to sense that something profound was changing. It was not sudden, like an earthquake or a storm, but subtle, like the way leaves gradually change color before falling. The air seemed heavier with tension, and even the most careful observers could feel that the old ways of keeping peace and order were no longer enough. Diplomacy, once a reliable tool to smooth over disagreements and maintain appearances, could no longer hold the fragile structure of stability. Words alone were failing. Polite gestures, public statements, and carefully measured smiles had begun to lose their power. For William, the weight of this moment was enormous. Every choice he made carried consequences not just for himself, but for the monarchy and for generations to come. This was not about acting on impulse or letting anger guide his decisions. Instead, it was the product of long, careful thought. Nights spent reflecting on responsibility and the question of legacy, how history would remember him. He understood that a single wrong step could ripple across decades, shaping the perception of the institution he had inherited. The monarchy was no longer just a family, it was a symbol, and symbols must be preserved carefully, sometimes at great personal cost. Over months, and especially in the weeks leading up to autumn 2024, William had observed patterns that could not be ignored. He watched Catherine, his partner and co-guardian of the monarchy, putting immense effort into building unity and respect. She had been tireless, patient, and strategic, often working behind the scenes to stabilize relationships and maintain the dignity of the crown. Yet despite her efforts, he saw a persistent undermining of her work. Actions, both subtle and deliberate, worked against her. Media campaigns targeted her image and decisions with a precision that was almost frightening. Stories appeared, disappeared, and reappeared, each carrying a tone designed to question competence, sow doubt, or provoke conflict. It was not random. It was planned, calculated, and relentless. William realized that in such a climate, silence could no longer serve as a shield. Remaining quiet, waiting for situations to resolve themselves, or hoping that goodwill alone would carry them through was no longer an option. Every day that passed without action seemed to make the pressures worse. The attacks, both overt and hidden, did not just affect him. They threatened the stability of the monarchy and the security of his family. He understood deeply that his decisions would define not only the present, but the future. There could be no turning back once a course was chosen. This understanding of responsibility, combined with his acute awareness of the broader consequences, prepared William for what was to come. The stage was set for a historic, irreversible declaration, one that would not simply respond to current challenges, but would actively shape the next chapter of the monarchy. Unlike the incremental changes of the past, this decision would be public, personal, and decisive. It would leave no room for misinterpretation, no way for critics to dilute its meaning with half-truths or delay tactics. Even the timing of his decision was deliberate. Autumn 2024, with its sense of endings and transitions, provided a symbolic backdrop. Just as the season signals change in nature, leaves falling, days shortening, and the earth preparing for winter, so too did this moment signal a shift in the monarchy. It was a period that demanded clarity, courage, and foresight. To act during this time was not just practical, it was almost poetic. It aligned the personal weight of responsibility with the natural rhythm of life, emphasizing that change, while sometimes difficult, is inevitable and necessary. Behind the scenes, William's reflections were intense and deeply personal. He considered not just the immediate effects of his actions, but the long-term narrative that would define his reign. What would historians say? How would the public perceive the monarchy in the decades to come? Could silence, or even hesitation, be justified when the very institution depended on clarity, decisiveness, and moral authority? His mind returned repeatedly to the idea of legacy. Every decision, every word, every gesture had the potential to either strengthen or weaken the centuries-old institution. At the same time, the human element was impossible to ignore. Family, loyalty, and personal well-being were intertwined with public duty. William understood that this declaration, while necessary, would carry emotional consequences. It would leave some feeling hurt, others confused, and perhaps even the wider world in shock. Yet he knew that postponing the inevitable would only prolong instability and uncertainty. There is a rare courage in confronting reality directly, even when it is painful, and William was prepared to exercise it. Did William encounter any struggle or pressure beyond the palace walls? Let's take a closer look. William's strategic pressures. Beyond his personal struggles, Prince William faced pressures that went far beyond the private walls of his family life. These pressures were strategic, public, and at times dangerous. The world around him was shifting in ways that demanded careful attention, not just for his own well-being, but for the survival and credibility of the monarchy itself. It was a time when private emotions and public duty collided, and decisions could no longer be made lightly or out of impulse. Every move was being watched, dissected, and interpreted by millions. And William knew that hesitation could come at a cost far higher than disappointment. It could threaten the very institution his family had served for generations. King Charles, focused on his own path of recovery and public image, provided guidance that carried both warmth and the weight of expectation. Charles had long balanced two demanding responsibilities: loyalty to his family and duty to the institution. William watched closely, understanding that the choices his father made, whether in public appearances, private discussions, or moments of crisis, would have consequences for everyone connected to the royal family. The king's approach combined resilience with pragmatism, reminding William that leadership was never about comfort or avoidance. Leadership demanded confronting uncomfortable truths, sometimes with courage and decisiveness that few could comprehend from the outside. Security briefings, often shrouded in secrecy, brought William face to face with threats that were more organized and coordinated than he had imagined. These reports revealed psychological attacks aimed directly at Catherine. Some of these threats were traced back to extremist groups, stirring alarm far beyond the royal household. The situation raised diplomatic concerns, not just in London, but in capitals such as Washington, D.C., and Ottawa. Officials there monitored the unfolding situation with interest and caution, knowing that instability within one of the world's most recognizable institutions could have ripple effects on international trust and alliances. For William, these briefings were a stark reminder that threats were not only personal, they were political, institutional, and global. The stakes were enormous, and the cost of inaction was too great to ignore. Amid these turbulent currents, Princess Anne provided advice that cut through the noise and emotion. She reminded William that a leader must place the needs of the institution above those of destabilizing individuals. Her words were simple but powerful. Personal feelings, no matter how intense, could never outweigh the responsibility to the monarchy. In moments of doubt, her guidance became a compass, showing him the path where duty intersected with morality. She emphasized that leadership was rarely about comfort. It was about courage and foresight, about protecting something larger than oneself. This advice resonated deeply with William. reminding him that the choices he made would define not only his own legacy, but the future of the monarchy itself. As days turned into weeks, the evidence of threats grew harder to ignore. Reports detailed attacks on reputation, manipulations aimed at destabilizing the family, and attempts to erode trust both at home and abroad. The consequences of ignoring these actions could be devastating, potentially shaking confidence in the monarchy at a time when public faith was already fragile. William realized that silence, patience, or delayed responses were no longer options. The moment demanded clarity, decisiveness, and a willingness to act in the best interest of stability and public trust. William also understood that action was not simply a response to immediate threats. It was a statement of values, responsibility, and legacy. Every decision he considered was measured against long-term consequences, not short-term satisfaction. The choices he faced were delicate, requiring a balance between firmness and fairness, courage and diplomacy. Failure to act could be interpreted as weakness, potentially emboldening those who sought to undermine not only Catherine, but the institution itself. Conversely, decisive, measured action could preserve the integrity of the monarchy, reinforce public confidence, and demonstrate that leadership was defined not by popularity, but by the ability to safeguard principles under pressure. The weight of these responsibilities, combined with personal loyalty and family love, created a moment of unprecedented gravity. William had to navigate a complex landscape of internal family dynamics, public expectations, and global scrutiny. Every action or inaction carried implications that could resonate for years, shaping perceptions of the monarchy, influencing diplomatic relations, and determining the future of an institution that had survived for centuries. The clarity he needed was hard-won, born from reflection, counsel, and careful observation of both threats and opportunities. Is it possible that William's team carried out a complete legal and diplomatic review of the circumstances affecting the monarchy? Let's find out. William Team Legal and Diplomatic Review. In the autumn of 2024, Prince William and his team took a step that had been long in preparation. They carried out a full legal and diplomatic review of the situation surrounding the monarchy. This was not a simple exercise. Every angle, every possible consequence was examined carefully. They realized that any form of uncertainty or ambiguity could now pose serious risks, both to the monarchy's rules and traditions and to its overall security. Even a small misunderstanding could shake confidence in the monarchy, not just in the United Kingdom, but around the world. The team understood that international partners and allies were watching closely. For decades, the monarchy had been a symbol of stability, a constant amid the ever-changing world stage. But now, signs of internal turmoil were becoming obvious. Public confidence, which had always been a quiet but steady foundation, was beginning to erode. People noticed tension behind the palace walls, disagreements leaking into the public sphere, and media coverage hinting at uncertainty. In times like these, partners around the globe demanded clear signals of leadership, trustworthiness, and stability. They could not afford to work with an institution that seemed unsure of its own direction. Princess Anne, long respected for her sharp insight and pragmatic approach, weighed in strongly during these assessments. She emphasized the urgent need to set formal boundaries. Endless negotiation, she argued, would only make things worse. When rules were vague or unwritten, interpretation became subjective, and subjective interpretations led to disputes. Without clearly defined limits and responsibilities, every action or inaction could be misunderstood. Misinterpretation, she warned, had the potential to snowball into full-scale crises. Silence, she reminded everyone, was no longer a neutral choice. Every moment of quiet carried the risk of appearing weak. In a world that craved clarity, The monarchy could not afford to leave questions unanswered. For William, this was not a decision based on hope or wishful thinking. There had been many moments in the past when hope might have guided him, when silence could have been considered a protective shield. But by 2024, hope alone was no longer enough. The situation demanded action, and it demanded clarity. Every choice had to be deliberate, precise, and carefully communicated. Anything less risked undermining the institution that he and his predecessors had dedicated their lives to preserving. Legal experts highlighted another critical element. The constitutional framework of the United Kingdom, while resilient, was not immune to strain. Ambiguity in decision-making could trigger complex legal challenges, ranging from questions about succession to disputes over royal prerogatives. Diplomatic advisors added that uncertainty could damage alliances that had taken years to build. Governments around the world had long relied on a stable monarchy as part of the broader fabric of international relations. Even a minor sign of instability could ripple outward, affecting treaties, diplomatic negotiations, and mutual trust. In other words, the stakes were not only national but international. The team also recognized the importance of timing. In times of uncertainty, the public pays attention not just to what leaders do, but to how quickly and decisively they act. Hesitation could be read as indecision, and indecision could weaken faith in the institution. That faith, once lost, was difficult to regain. Therefore, the strategy had to balance caution with decisiveness. Every message needed to be unambiguous. Every move had to signal strength and responsibility. The monarchy could no longer rely on tradition alone. It needed a clear, modern demonstration of authority and vision. What step did the Royal Council take in this situation? Let's find out. Private Council Resolution. On December 1st, a small but highly strategic council met at Windsor. This was not a casual family gathering. It was a meeting designed to address one of the most serious challenges the monarchy had faced in decades. Tensions had been simmering for years, and it had become clear that leaving matters unresolved was no longer safe. The purpose of this council was to craft a clear path forward, a plan that would safeguard not only the family's unity, but also the credibility and stability of the monarchy itself. Prince William began the meeting by presenting a carefully prepared statement. Every word had been thought out. Every phrase weighed for its impact and clarity. This was a declaration meant to leave no room for misunderstanding. William understood that vague statements or half measures would only prolong uncertainty, which could weaken both the family and the institution they represented. The message was designed to be firm, decisive, and, most importantly, permanent. It was a carefully structured effort to turn a moment of crisis into a foundation for long-term stability. King Charles, seated beside William, carried the weight of a father's heart. His sorrow was visible, a man deeply concerned not only for the family he had raised, but also for the public institution he had spent decades serving. He listened carefully to each point, the lines of worry on his face reflecting the difficulty of balancing love for his children with the need to preserve the monarchy's authority and reputation. Charles understood that this was not about personal grievances alone. The stakes were far higher. Every misstep could ripple through centuries of tradition and affect the monarchy's place in a modern world that demanded both transparency and strength. Princess Anne, in contrast, approached the matter from a perspective of duty and institutional preservation. She emphasized repeatedly that emotions, however valid, could not dictate the outcome. History, she reminded the council, was filled with examples where hesitation and compromise had undermined strong institutions. To her, clarity and decisiveness were not just practical, they were essential. Her calm but firm guidance helped frame the discussion, ensuring that decisions were made not in the heat of personal emotion, but in consideration of long-term consequences for the monarchy and the nation. Catherine, whose role had often been one of quiet support and strategic insight, brought a vital perspective of compassion and balance. She recognized the emotional turmoil surrounding the family situation, yet she also understood the necessity of clarity. Her presence added a sense of fairness and neutrality to the conversation, helping to ensure that the decisions reached were neither harshly punitive nor dismissive of the human realities involved. Catherine's insight reinforced the Council's collective understanding that the decisions made would shape both public perception and private relationships for years to come. The Council methodically weighed every possible option. Delays, half measures, and vague agreements were all considered and rejected. William argued that ambiguity had become too dangerous to tolerate. Left unresolved, it could allow misunderstandings, media speculation, and internal disagreements to fester and grow. Each day of indecision carried risk, threatening both family harmony and the monarchy's reputation. The council members recognized that inaction was no longer a viable option. After long and careful discussion, the council reached a unanimous conclusion. A clear, decisive, and permanent separation was necessary. This was not a decision made lightly, nor was it a punitive move. It was a protective measure, intended to shield both the family and the monarchy from the continuing stress of ambiguity. The council agreed that by taking decisive action, they could create a new stability. This foundation allowed the monarchy to endure, while also respecting the personal realities of those involved. So, what do you think about Prince William's final verdict that made Meghan cry? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.